A client said something to me very recently that I think a lot of people in their 40s and 50s will relate to. He had found out that he had fatty liver, and he genuinely couldn't understand why. He said, I don't eat much. In fact, he also said that he eats quite light. He doesn't really eat much sugar, he barely drinks, and he walks regularly. So his question was, then how did someone like me still end up with fatty liver? And that's actually what I want to talk to you about today. Because fatty liver is often explained as though you must have done something terribly wrong. Right? You may have eaten too much, maybe too much sugar, too much fat, you drank too much, you didn't exercise, and therefore you got fatty liver. But isn't it isn't always that simple. Right? You can be doing a few things right and still develop fatty liver. And if that is someone you relate to, then simply telling you eat less and walk more isn't necessarily helping you understand what is going on. And as we get into today, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Samat. I'm the founder of Anam Baluda. I'm the founder of Growing Young. Sometimes I make issues like that, but most of the time, I work primarily with busy executives in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, to people who basically want to improve their health without having to make fitness their full time job. And one of the things that we often see, me and my team often see, is exactly this. Right? We see people who are successful, we see people who are disciplined, we see people who are reasonably conscious about their food, but their health reports are slowly starting to tell a different story. So today, I want to explain why fatty liver can be one of those stories. And I'll keep this simple, right? First of all, what actually is fatty liver? It literally means that too much fat has accumulated inside the liver, hence the name fatty liver. And that's the basic problem. But here's where people start to get confused. They hear fat in the liver and immediately think, I must have eaten too much fat. But that's not how it works. Some of the fat stored in your body can travel through your blood and reach your liver to build up there. In fact, your liver can also make new fat cells from the energy available to it. And for some of you that eat fat, some of that can contribute as well. But human studies have directly shown that fatty liver can be or can come from all of these sources. So fatty liver isn't simply something that you can say I ate oily food and therefore I got fatty liver. And that's the first thing that I want you to understand today. Because if you're sitting there saying, but I hardly eat fried foods, you may be absolutely right. And I'm not trying to find the food that you secretly ate and blame you for it. Because that is really not the point of today. The more useful question is why and what is happening inside the body that is allowing more fat to accumulate in your liver. And this is where something called insulin resistance starts becoming important. Now, you've probably heard that term. And for those of you that have read anything to do with longevity, you understand that it is something that many doctors and researchers keep speaking about. But let me make it very simple. Whenever you eat, your body has to handle that incoming energy from that food, right? Some of it gets used, some of it gets stored, and in all of this process your muscles are involved, your liver is involved, your fat tissues are involved, and insulin sort of helps coordinate a lot of this. When the body becomes less responsive to insulin, we call that insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is one of the major metabolic problems associated with fatty liver. So I want you to think about it this way: your body is becoming less efficient at dealing with the energy coming in. And over time, you may start seeing clues, right? Maybe your blood sugar is slightly higher than it used to be. Maybe your triglycerides are creeping up. Maybe your waist has increased. Or maybe you've gained 3 to 4 kilos over 10 years. Nothing that one would call dramatic. You still look normal in clothes, you still go to work, you still feel reasonably healthy, but internally, things may not be exactly where they were 10 or 15 years ago. And that's why this statement, when people tell me, but I don't eat much, That statement never fully answers the question because there are actually two questions. How much are you actually eating, and how well is your body handling what you're eating? And those are not the same question. Now, someone may say, fine, but I'm not overweight, and neither do I drink often. And this is another important point. In fact, this is a very important point that I would like to bring up. You don't necessarily have to look overweight to develop fatty liver. Where you store fat matters, right? Where you genetically store fat really matters. Your metabolic health matters. Your genetics will definitely matter. And this is particularly relevant for Indians and South Asians because metabolic problems, which means problems due to having an improper metabolism or an inefficient metabolism, can appear at body weights that don't necessarily look alarming from the outside. In fact, most of the people who have diseases like fatty liver from India tend to be skinny fat, right? And this is something that is very important to remember because you might look at yourself and think, I'm fine, I'm not obese. And you may genuinely not be obese. And maybe you may have noticed a couple of other things, right? Like your waist has gradually gone from here to here. Your weight may have only changed by around 4 kilos, but your body may have changed more than all those 4 kilos suggest, right? And what I mean by that is the changes in your body do not or is not necessarily always reflected by weight. Weight is usually one of the last things that we see as an indicator for good or bad health, right? Because maybe genetically you're carrying a little more fat around the abdomen, maybe you have a little less muscle, or maybe you're moving a little less, or even something like your blood sugar may have moved slightly upwards, maybe your triglycerides have moved slightly upwards. And again, nothing dramatic, right? There is nothing dramatic about these changes, and that's actually the point that I'm trying to make. For a lot of people, this fatty liver or even other aspects of insulin resistance, it isn't one massive event. These are small changes happening slowly. Now, here I would like to address another thing my client or a lot of my clients keep saying when they get diagnosed with fatty liver. They come up and tell me that somehow I walk regularly, which is good. It's fantastic. Keep walking, right? Walking is absolutely useful. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that your morning walk is pointless because it isn't. The mistake is assuming that because you walked for 30 or 40 minutes, the rest of your day no longer matters. Think about what a normal executive day can look like, right? You wake up, you go for your walk, you come home, breakfast, get into the car, sit in traffic, reach the office, meeting, another meeting, calls, lunch, sit again, another few hours of work, back into the car, reach home, dinner, laptop, maybe television, and then bed. So, yes, you walked for 40 minutes, and that was good. But you have also spent most of the other day sitting. Now, both can be true at the same time, right? Current fatty liver guidance specifically recommends physical activity and reducing sedentary behavior rather than treating one exercise session as the whole picture. So when people speak about them walking, I don't only want to know how much they walk. I want to look at their movement more broadly, right? And then there's one other part that becomes important as we get older: muscle. And when I say muscle, I don't necessarily mean bodybuilding or six pack abs. I don't mean you suddenly start training like you're Rambo at the age of 25. I'm talking about maintaining basic strength and muscle as you age. Walking and strength training are not the same thing. Walking helps use your muscles, it does not help grow your muscles, but it is excellent to use. So keep it. But doing some sensible resistance training as well gives you something that walking alone cannot. And this is the one reason I don't like reducing exercise after the age of 40 to just get your goddamn steps, right? move, walk, do whatever you want like that, but maintain your strength as well. Now, if we put everything we've spoken about in total together, and this is where I think fatty liver starts to make much more sense, right? Because imagine someone who's 52. He genuinely doesn't eat enormous portions. He doesn't eat a lot of sugar. He barely drinks. He walks most mornings, but there's nothing really obviously disastrous about his life. But if you compare himself with his age at himself at 35, at 35, he may be moved much more without even thinking about it. He had more muscle. He spent less time sitting. His waist was mostly smaller, and his blood sugar, his triglycerides were much lower. Now he's 52, and over 17 years, none of those things have changed massively, but they all changed slightly. And that is the part I want you to understand, right? Nothing had to go terribly wrong for fatty liver to come in. Several things may have simply moved gradually in the wrong direction. And eventually, one of those places that metabolic change can become visible happens to be the liver. So that is very different from, like me trying to rub it in your face and you did this and saying that you did this to yourself. It's also very different from saying there's nothing that you can do about it, because neither of these things are useful. What we actually want to know is what can we change now that can make the difference towards not just getting rid of fatty liver, but making sure that you keep it away long term. So if you've been told that you have fatty liver, don't leave this live with a list of 25 separate things to worry about, right? Start with something much simpler. Look at your waist. Know what your blood sugar or particularly your HbA1c is doing. Look at your triglycerides on your blood test and think honestly about how much you move across your whole day. Do you actually train strength throughout the week, or do you just go on and off to the gym? Right? Think about what you are doing that we discussed today is actually relevant to what your fatty liver needs in order to be cured, right? Because that's already enough to start seeing the bigger picture. Don't just reduce it to walking and eating minimal. And of course, if fatty liver has shown up on your scan or blood work, discuss it with your doctor, right? Particularly if it's come up on your ultrasound. Because there are different levels of liver disease, different causes, and some people need further assessment, right? Insulin resistance, when I say that, is generally the central cause to many of these cases of metabolic fatty liver, but it is not the only possible contributor. So let's come back to where we started, right? I had a client who told me that he doesn't eat much, he doesn't eat much sugar, barely drinks, walks. Great, all good, right? I don't need to prove that he's secretly doing something wrong. All of those things can be true. And the point is that they still don't tell us the whole metabolic story. And that's the main thing that I want you to take away today. Fatty liver is not simply punishment from eating badly, right? It's information. And it's one signal that tells us let's look more closely at what is happening metabolically on the inside of the body. And very often, the earlier you pay attention to these signals, the more opportunity you have to do something about it. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, this actually sounds a lot like me, maybe you've already been told that you've had fatty liver, you've tried eating less, you've tried walking more, you've tried doing whatever somebody told you to do. But your reports, unfortunately, haven't improved the way you expected. Or maybe you know what you're supposed to do, but with your work, your travel, your meetings, and schedule, you've never been able to put a proper structure around it. Right? And if you feel like you need professionals to actually look at your situation rather than giving you generic diets or exercise plans, then comment the word liver below this live, right? Or below this video. My team will reach out to you to arrange a call with me. And the purpose of that call is very simple. We'll understand where you are right now, what you've already tried, and whether this is actually something we can help you with. And if it is, we'll look at how quickly and to what extent we can realistically and most importantly, sustainably help, right? Because if we're not the right people for you, we'll tell you that too. And before I finish, I want to tell you what we're going to cover in the next slide. Because today, the word insulin resistance has come up many times. And in fact, it will come up many times moving forward because that is one of the key understandings that we need to live a long, healthy, and vital life. And I want to correct one thing before we move forward. I wouldn't necessarily say that fatty liver is simply a symptom of insulin resistance. That's too broad of a statement to make. But with many people who have metabolic fatty liver, insulin resistance becomes one of the major underlying problems. And that's where another interesting question comes in, right? Why does insulin resistance develop in the first place? Right? It's not just about fatty liver, but insulin resistance is also a key driver for type 2 diabetes. And most of the time, somebody who has fatty liver tends to have diabetes, and somebody who has diabetes tends to have fatty liver or is more likely to get it in the near future, right? So we need to address, why does insulin resistance develop in the first place, especially when someone doesn't eat much sugar? Because again, the usual explanation for this is that you ate too much sugar, therefore you became insulin resistant. And once again, actual biology is way more interesting than that. So, in the next slide, we're going to go a level deeper. We're going to look at what causes insulin resistance, why it can develop even when you don't think your diet is particularly bad. And we're also going to cover about what happens to the way your muscle, liver, and fat actually respond to insulin during insulin resistance. And most importantly, we will also cover what parts of the process you can actually influence with your day to day habits. So, if today's life has made you think differently about fatty liver, I think you'll find the next one particularly useful, because today we spoke about one place metabolic dysfunction can show up: the liver. And next time, we're going deeper into one of the major processes sitting underneath issues like fatty liver and type 2 diabetes: insulin resistance. So, if that's something that interests you, I will see you on the next live. And I hope you enjoyed today and today was valuable to you. See you soon.